if you're in a country where Venezuela, Argentina, where the money loses value, say 5,000% per year, you have no desire to hold on to any money. And if you can't hold on to any money, you have no hope for the future. So you might as well just do the thing that benefits you the most right now. And from a moral compass standpoint, that's generally not good, right? You want your society saying, I'm going to, think for the future and act for the future. And if I can do those things, then my life is generally going to be much better.
Welcome back to The Culture Bit. On today's episode, I speak with Ben Askren, MMA fighter, Bitcoin advocate, libertarian. We touch on so many things, including the Bitcoin SBR and just the values that make Bitcoiners Bitcoiners. It was a fantastic episode. He's going to be speaking at Bitcoin 2025 later this May. If you haven't secured those tickets yet, you can use code BM10 for 10% off at checkout. Secure those tickets at b.tc/conference. Now to the show. Ben, absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. You're a Bellator welterweight champion, huge Bitcoin advocate. You have your own Bitcoin podcast. You've spoken at a number of Bitcoin conference events. So you're very well known in the space, but for those who may not be familiar with who Ben Askren is, let's set the baseline here. Ben, who are you?
Well, and I'm one of the few that has the courage and tenacity to not become a shitcoiner. It's so funny to see so many people in the space. I got in, I will tell you, it's actually fight related. So I was a Bellator champion. So like I said, I grew up wrestling. I wrestled. I won 2 NCAA titles. I went to the Olympics. I decided to fight. I was a Bellator champion for roughly 3.5 years. And then I went to an organization in Asia called One Championship, where I was the champion there also for roughly 3.5 years before my initial retirement. But it was at my September. I think the fight was September 1st, 2017. So I went over there a week early. I had a really close friend who lived in Australia who was a college wrestling teammate. And whenever I was on his side of the planet, he would come watch me fight because we were good buddies. And he said, it was in Shanghai and he got there and he said, hey man, I got to tell you this thing called Bitcoin. I said, hit me with it. And he told me, and I'm like, oh shit, that's awesome. I had already read, Ron Paul and the Fed. So I kind of knew the dollar was a scam. And so I was ready for it. When he hit me with it, I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's going to work. And so I've kind of been in ever since then. He did get me into the same guy. His name's Rye. He got me into a bunch of shit coins also that went to zero. So, we all have, so here's the thing. Ideally we have that phase in the beginning and we realize, oh, this is not the way to go. And then, we figure out that Bitcoin is a thing. Some people are opposite. And mostly it's because these influencers, they don't have the courage and moral compass to not take all the money that can be got in the shitcoin space. So I got in 2017. I've been in ever since. I went to the Bitcoin conference. I missed the good one in 21, but I've been in 22, 23, 24, and I'm going this year, obviously 25 to Vegas.
Yeah, no, I shared sentiments with you. I'm class of 2017 as well. Love the libertarian background that you have as well. That's always a super common trope, I think, of that class period and even the cycle prior. Yeah. So let's start there a little bit. Let's dig a little bit more into why Ron Paul. Why, as a wrestler, were you interested in this guy? What were the things in your life that led up to a point that brought you to kind of to the Libertarian Party as a whole, and then made you start thinking about money?
No one even asked me that question, and I honestly don't know. I don't know how I got interested in Ron Paul. It would have been sometime prior to 2012 because I voted for him in 2012 in the presidential election. But I read. There's End the Fed, which is that was probably the first one. I can't remember the name of the book, but there's one about how essentially the government school system is a monopoly and shouldn't be allowed to exist. I got really into reading Ron Paul and kind of agree with his take on small government. And now it's funny because that was 2012 I voted for him. 2024, it feels like everyone's finally coming around to the idea that our government is too large and it's spending way too much money and it's completely unsustainable. And we want more freedom in our lives and less government tyranny. So it feels like that idea is becoming mainstream now. And so, yeah, it feels really good to see Elon and, going in and just saying, "Oh, this is garbage. This is garbage. Cut this out. Cut this out." Yeah. So, yeah, it feels like a long time coming.
It definitely feels like a long time coming. I feel like the start of kind of the anti-government movement, I guess you could go all the way back to 2001, the Patriot Act, and Americans starting to wake up that the government was, largely overstepping into privacy lanes of everyday Americans, whether it was data harvesting and that sort of thing. And then the 2008 financial crash, Wall Street, all that bred a new breed of libertarians questioning, like, why is the state in control of money? Obviously, Bitcoin was bred out of that entire crisis. So it all makes sense. And then, like, to your point, yeah, now it's mainstream, which is weird to see. It's weird to see. Bitcoin traditionally has been this grassroots, bottom-up movement, and now we're in this period.
Bitcoin is still, like, even Elon, which, who knows? Like, if you want to sell me the conspiracy that he is one of the creators of Bitcoin and he's just not coming around to it because he doesn't want to show that, I could say, maybe. Probably not, but you never know. Maybe, right? The world's crazy. But people still haven't figured out Bitcoin. So Elon is talking about how too much government spending causes inflation and why that's bad, blah, blah, blah. And once you start heading down that path, and the thing that I always say for a lot of regular people is they don't even understand what is money. They don't understand that. If you say, "Hey, what's money?" They'll say, "Oh, the dollar," right? But they don't understand that the money is essentially something that in IOU we get for our time and effort and our expertise in something that ideally we can then hold and then use at a later point in time. I was just explaining to some younger, I say younger, they're probably college age, but how high time preference leads to bad behavior. So if you're in a country where Venezuela, Argentina, where the money loses value, say 5,000% per year, you have no desire to hold on to any money. And if you can't hold on to any money, you have no hope for the future. So you might as well just do the thing that benefits you the most right now. And from a moral compass standpoint, that's generally not good, right? You want your society saying, I'm going to, think for the future and act for the future. And if I can do those things, then my life is generally going to be much better.
Absolutely. Well, and you have probably a unique perspective here, being a fighter, and knowing not just Bellator, but the UFC, even wrestling as a whole brings a swath of people internationally together, right? Some in these areas that are affected by hyperinflation, hypercurrency debasement, and that sort of thing. So I'm curious, when you're asking, I'm sure you've had a number of conversations with some of your peers. You're like, "Hey, I figured out this Bitcoin thing. It's a solution to a lot of the libertarian problems that I've seen." So you're excited to talk about it. And I'm sure at some point you ask that question to these people. They're like, "Well, hey, what is money to you?" What are some of the answers you get?
Man, no one, it's so rare someone actually understands that question. So rare. Most of them will say the dollar or, but they won't give an in-depth answer. And then the question after what is money is what is good money? Like what qualities do I want a good money to have? Even, oh my God, who did I just listen to? It was either someone on Tucker or who the hell? Oh, it was a guy. I like him. He's a macroeconomist. It was Tucker, but they started talking about, I'm going to have to look it up to see who it was. So it was someone I like, but they started talking about, why gold's important and why more people are putting value on gold and hard money and blah, blah, blah. But they didn't really get into like why Bitcoin is better than gold in pretty much every category. And therefore, anyone who finds gold is going to eventually find, even Peter Schiff will eventually find Bitcoin to be a better replacement for gold. Sorry, who is it?
While you're looking him up.
I got my phone. Oh, Luke Grommen. I think he's great, actually.
I actually haven't listened to Luke Grommen too much. Just tell me about that conversation a little bit. I always...
Yeah, but they were just going into the huge, the gold movements and the macroeconomics of everything. And it was really awesome. But he didn't really get into Bitcoin all that much. And when they're talking about why gold was a great money or the best money, and Tucker kept bringing that up also. That I don't know. I felt like there was a really good place for like, well, hey, everything that gold does, Bitcoin kind of does a little bit better.
So for the audience and for anybody who's not living vicariously through Bitcoin Twitter, Ben and I were chatting about the Peter Schiff tweet that occurred yesterday.
Yes.
As a result of Trump talking about the strategic Bitcoin reserve and putting out a tweet saying that a bunch of shitcoins were going to be in it. I think the initial tweet said that like Solana, Ripple, Cardano,
Ripple's
like the three biggest scam coins of all are going to be lumped in it, and no mention of Bitcoin at all. And so rightfully so, the Bitcoin community, immediate backlash. They're like, hey, we told you this was going to happen. The strategic reserve should be Bitcoin only. Trump, rightfully so, quickly followed up, talking about, how Bitcoin and unfortunately Ethereum are going to be in it. If you were to ask me my opinions on that, I think there's a little bit of a 4D chess play going on there. However, to go back to the...
Really? Why? Tell me why. I want to know.
Yeah. So Trump ran on this campaign of America First. And there's a lot of these, shitcoins, altcoins, whatever you want to call them, that are based here in the U.S. And he came out originally swinging very pro Bitcoin. So I think in order to maintain pawns on the chessboard and maintain clear and concise messaging, he has to placate to the entire industry and can't play favorites, which obviously from a Bitcoiner's POV, seems like a waste of time. Seems like it doesn't make sense. Can I ask you a question
there? I've been thinking this. So the Bitcoin obviously has a lot of ardent backers who are very well thought out for the most part. Obviously, like a Charles Hoskinson who created Cardano. Well, he loves Cardano, but I really don't feel like there's many people who are like, yeah, everything in crypto is great. Like, there's not like crypto backers. They might like one or two, a couple projects, but they're not. There's no one who's crazy enough to say, yeah, I'll blanket all this shit is good, right? Because so many of them are just obvious scams, just completely obvious scams. So you can't say everything's good because, I can point to 2 or 3 or 4 or 20 obvious scams. So I have a hard time with saying there are people who are just like pro everything crypto. There are people who are pro everything Bitcoin, but not pro. I feel like who is pro everything crypto? Am I crazy or what?
No, I don't think you're crazy at all. I think there's two sides to the coin here. There's the glass half full and the glass half empty perspective. So let me start with the glass half full.
Yeah.
To your point earlier, everybody goes through a shitcoining phase, and it's kind of crazy to see the U.S. government speed running its shitcoin phase.
Yeah.
But and by proxy, the rest of the world, right? I mean, it's on the world stage. Everybody's paying attention to this stuff. Like, I guarantee you, you might be able to go to your best friend in high school and be like, hey, tell me about the principles of sound money. And they're going to look at you like crazy. But I'll tell you what they do know is Trump coin and Melania coin. They definitely are aware of that.
I can't tell you how many people have asked me about Ripple. And God damn it, why are you texting me about Ripple? This is bullshit.
Yeah, my father-in-law hit me up with that question a couple of weeks ago. I was like...
Yeah, to me, honestly, though, part of this is like, someone needs to hire their freaking marketing department because they are somehow getting to people. I don't know how they're getting to people so well, but they're freaking getting to people and convincing people it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So their marketing department is tremendous, and they probably, someone else, Bitcoin Magazine maybe should hire Ripple's marketing department because they're freaking.
Well, I'll tell you the key to it. It's their money printer. They dump on the people who are buying, and so they can pay these mass marketers.
Yeah,
I might suggest it to David. I hope David doesn't employ that for us. But yeah, to go back to kind of this glass half full analogy here.
Yeah.
You have to look at who is Trump surrounding himself with, right? So look at his Treasury Secretary, look at his Commerce Secretary, Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick. Look at JD Vance, right? He only owns Bitcoin. Look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr., only owns Bitcoin. Tulsi Gabbard, Vivek Ramaswamy. The list goes on and on of everybody who is very pro Bitcoin in the core cabinet, right?
Uh-huh.
And then you have this interesting play where you have, kind of the political darling, U.S. Senator Cynthia Lummis, who is proposing the Bitcoin Act, who within that act has an actual plan of action, who is saying like, hey, we're going to use the excess Treasury gold deposits here to purchase Bitcoin.
Yeah.
With the goal to accumulate, I think it was 1 million Bitcoin. And then on the flip side, now all of a sudden you have Trump, instituting a digital asset committee chair, which Cynthia Lummis is part of. And then you also have a crypto czar, which is which is David Sachs. And David, as we all know, is a huge proponent of Solana, which, definitely has a conflict of interest on that front, and is an interesting pick given everybody else's background in that sort of thing. And so, if I were to give the benefit of the doubt, maybe there's some money and some lobbying play there. But maybe the intent is to actually speed run the shitcoining phase while maintaining the illusion that, like, hey, he's America first and going to, prop up these American companies. There's a benefit to that, right? Because, by proxy, these crypto companies require a lot of compute systems and high compute systems. And there's an entire movement right now to bring not just chip manufacturing, but all of, these HPCs stateside. And so maybe there's an interplay there. And maybe I'm just, blowing up smoke up the Trump administration right now to try to give them the benefit of the doubt. But I still believe that there are the right people in place who understand that, like, hey, Bitcoin is the apex asset. All this other stuff is noise. Where that lands during this administration, I'm not sure. I was curious to hear your take.
I mean, the other obvious is no action has actually been taken at this point, so I'm sure they're going to have at least a few discussions. And if they get some of the right smart people in there, they'll be able to very clearly explain why Ripple is a scam and why they should not have that one in there. And they could probably go through the other ones and do something similar. So hopefully that's actually what happens.
Yeah, hopefully. We'll have to see. I mean, a lot's moving fast. A lot of promises. Some promises have been delivered. The whole big thing when Trump got into office for the first 3 weeks was like, promises made, promises kept. But one promise that was made was a potential day one executive order action of actually purchasing Bitcoin. And, I recently was listening to you and Jack Mahler's on Timcast talking about this. And Jack was very adamant that, like, hey, at minimum, that sort of executive order would have been a signal that, hey, the U.S. is serious about buying Bitcoin. And in the mind of Trump being a legacy-minded person, right, this would have been a decision based on positive action, not out of reactionary action, right, where something negative is going on. It's like, hey, we're trading. We have a $1.3 trillion deficit coming up. We're going to have to renew all that debt or do something, kick the can down the line again. Who knows what we're going to do? But that Bitcoin action, I think, would have, sent a positive signal. So curious, what's your thoughts on all this? I know you mentioned, I think maybe you're on the opposite end of the spectrum, that some of these actions aren't good, but just curious overall what you think about what's going on in Capitol Hill.
Yeah. I mean, I do think I think so far so good with the Trump administration and the things they're doing. I do think some people have been impatient on certain things. Like things take time sometimes, right? Especially with the bureaucracy surrounding. But I think I've been pleasantly surprised that a lot of the good things are taking place. All of the, cabinet nominees that he wanted to get pretty much have got in, which is great. I think maybe there's one that didn't get in. So yeah, I think it's all good. I am hoping that when they all sit down, and they're supposed to have like a round table or something, I want to say maybe this Friday or this Saturday, once they sit down and do that, maybe more reasonable voices will win out, and it will just become Bitcoin only, or at the very least get rid of most of the shit coins that are going to be in the stockpile.
I think inevitably they're going to be out. It's just the course of action on how these things go. One thing I do recall you talking about on...
I do want Fort Knox to be audited, though. That's something they've been talking about. It's wild that Fort Knox, they said, what, it was 1950 or something was the last time it's been audited. That is just totally and utterly insane. Whereas Bitcoin's audited every 10 minutes.
Well, here's the crazy Marvel-esque unification partnership that we didn't see coming, but it's what we need, I think. And we were talking about this earlier with Peter Schiff and his pro Bitcoin tweet the other day as a result of all the shitcoining that now is going on. It's funny about gold bugs, and you were asking this question earlier, Ben. It's like, hey, gold bugs understand all the properties of hard sound money, decentralized currency that no single entity controls. And so why is Bitcoin not obvious to them. And I think part of it is that gold bugs have been at the center of sounding this alarm for decades. And now all of a sudden Bitcoin's come out of nowhere and it's starting to kind of eat their lunch as just a superior asset in terms of not just, scarcity and soundness, but also from a utility standpoint, right? You don't have to shave off Bitcoin like you would a gold bar to transact for a coffee every day. At least that's the argument Bitcoiners use.
And it's easier to transact with or ship, or like large quantities can be. I could send you a large quantity right now at almost zero cost, and you couldn't do that with gold, for example. There's counterfeit gold. I think there's just a bunch of it found, right? And there's not really counterfeit Bitcoin. I don't think that's possible. So yeah, I mean, I think everywhere it's superior, and maybe to me that means they haven't really looked deeply into it and taken the time to figure out what it's all about. Is kind of what that would signal to me, because if they did that, if they actually understood gold and they understood why gold is valuable, but and I think there's some people think, well, it's just what humans have always used and you could touch it, so therefore it's valuable, but there's more to it than that. So if they actually looked into it and understood why gold is valuable, then they would just say, oh, Bitcoin has very, very similar properties, but maybe is a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, I think that shift is going to happen sooner than later, especially with Peter's sentiment the other day. I mean, that's a huge signal to a lot of the Peter Schiff worshipers out there. But the bigger question, right? Let's talk about Fort Knox and this potential audit that's going to occur. What happens when there's one of two things that's going to happen, right? They've either not audited Fort Knox because there's way more gold in there from all the war that's occurred.
You think more or less?
I think it could go either way. There's either a ton of gold in there or there's no gold in there. That's either way it goes.
What would be the positive for the U.S. not representing that there is more gold in there? Like, why would they be trying to hide it? Because you think they took it in wars? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's an old photo that's going around, and I think maybe we can edit this in afterwards. But when we invaded, it was either Iraq or Kuwait. There's this photo. It's either U.S. Army or Marines, literally standing in these totefuls, not even totefuls, like shipping container fulls of gold bars that were obviously Saddam's. We obviously took that, and I don't know, like from a UN legal standpoint, like through war, is that like in Geneva Conventions or whatever? I'm like way out of my lane here, but is that legal? They obviously took it, right? And so, like, if you do the audit of Fort Knox, how many wars have we been in? How many conflicts have we been in? How much gold have we taken? So that's one side.
Yeah.
Or the other, there's no gold in there, or it's all tungsten that's been gold plated. And so in that instance, it's like, who sold the gold? Where's the gold going? So I don't know. What do you think?
I'm leaning that way. I'm leaning that way, that there's not as much as, has been represented. So, and now, who knows that, to your point where Lummis said sell off the gold to buy the Bitcoin, and then it becomes that race of who's going to do it first. And if, we start selling off a bunch of gold, that hurts. China's been buying a lot of gold, for example. So that would hurt China immensely, right? And then we would be the first one to the Bitcoin. And I think other people will eventually see it the way we see it, that Bitcoin is better than gold. And so other people have to do the same thing. And therefore, whoever gets there first is going to have a gigantic advantage.
I think if there's not the correct amount of gold, if there's less gold than what should be in Fort Knox, I think that's going to orange pill a lot of the gold bugs out there. And I think real quickly, we're going to have an even larger force behind us advocating for Bitcoin, on top of everything you just mentioned too, the mad rush from nation states looking to off their gold reserves in favor of Bitcoin. Essentially, there's a massive powder keg that's been brewing. I mean, we've had, El Salvador come in as a very pro Bitcoin country. It's been, obviously legalized as tender over there, and Bukele has done amazing things to pull that country out of being an emerging market economy to a first world nation. And then on top of that, tons of recent news globally of, China reversing its stance, Russia announcing they're mining, the Emirates announcing they're buying the Bitcoin ETF, even though that's not actually Bitcoin, but hey, it's still something.
Close enough.
Yeah.
For them.
So we're at
not for me.
We're at like a nuclear arms race here. Where do you see things going in the next year, 10 years?
What? Anything but to the moon is the wrong answer, right? Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, I've kind of said it 5 times, but it's like, once you start looking into it, once you start doing your research and waking up, then you realize that the dollar is kind of shitty money. I mean, the dollar is the best fiat currency, but all fiat currencies are not very good. And then you start thinking, okay, well, how can I get something that is real good money or hard money? And that obvious answer, the best one is Bitcoin. And so you start buying Bitcoin. And I think the more people look into it, the more they find that answer. And there have been some seminal moments in the last 5 years, so the trucker thing in Canada where they just froze everyone's bank account, where people realized, holy shit, maybe my money's not really mine, right? And that was a freedom thing, not a bad money thing. But there's all these things that kind of make you realize, oh man, like maybe it's not as it seems. And I think those will all lead you to buying Bitcoin.
Absolutely. So we briefly started to touch on some of the things or, instances in your life that made you start realizing that the money was broken. And you're the class of 2017, which is interesting. Yeah. You kind of front run the whole COVID fiasco where people really started to wake up to inflation and that sort of thing. So let's circle back to that, right? You're a wrestler. Wrestlers by nature understand proof of work in a nutshell, right? The more practicing you do, the better you're going to be on the mat. How have you seen your experience in wrestling and, your background in fighting translate over to Bitcoin? Because there's a lot of other fighters that are also very pro Bitcoin.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been asked that, and I've had a hard time making a strong, causation to one to the other. I think why fighters in particular, wrestlers, there's a handful. David Taylor, head coach at Oklahoma State, is a Bitcoiner. Kyle Dake, world champion, I believe he's a Bitcoiner. So there are some. I think it's the to do these things, you have to have a little bit of independence and want to work on your own. And you realize that, you're kind of in control of your own destiny type thing, right? Whereas in team sports, that's not always the case. So I think that's probably what leads these, those type of people to that place. Obviously not everybody is there, but, there's some significantly notable people in both wrestling and fighting that have gotten into Bitcoin. And I probably think that's why it's probably the independent nature of both sports.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really remember though. I've been trying to ever since you asked me in the initial question. I don't recall what my first introduction to Ron Paul is or why I started reading his books. I mean, I enjoyed reading, but I can't remember like what who gave me the book or what set it off. I don't remember. It was too long ago.
No, that's all good. It's still interesting because the mental models and the mental frameworks, I guess, were built for you over a long duration. Like it wasn't any one given moment.
It was probably something about, I started going down the conspiracy rabbit hole in probably 2004 or 5 or something like that. And probably this is my guess, one of those led me to the conspiracy that is the Federal Reserve. And then once you get there, that the Federal Reserve is kind of a conspiracy, then, at some point you find Ron Paul because, he was one of the very, very few people saying it, So how many people have ever said, end the Fed? And like Ron Paul, that's it. How many other politicians are saying, hey, let's audit the Fed or hey, let's end the Fed? And it's very few and far between.
So I'm going to totally show my age here. You are in a class of libertarian people where Ron Paul was a darling child that brought a lot of these issues to light. But for the listeners, especially us Gen Zers and even Gen Alpha, who's starting to understand some of the Bitcoin talk, why was Ron Paul in 2007, 2008 sounding the alarm with the Fed?
Oh man, I don't know what brought him to that point. I don't know the answer to that, but I think when you read "End the Fed," you realize we don't actually know what's happening there. And the Federal Reserve has a federal sounding name, but it's a privately owned entity that the government really doesn't have much control over. And you're saying like they're even trying to audit it now and take some of the power away, and it's like incredibly difficult. Um, so I think that's probably why. And then you start reading the Creature from Jekyll Island book. That's somewhere back there on the bookshelf. And yeah, you sit there and you want more answers as to what the truth is. And then Ron, I got to have dinner with Ron in 2017, 18, somewhere at the Litecoin convention. Actually, funny enough.
They were a sponsor of yours for a minute too, weren't they?
They were, yeah. You know what? Litecoin, I still think they get too much of a hard time because they are not a shitcoin. And Charlie Lee's great, but that's another topic. But Ron was one of the very few people who didn't get swallowed by the swamp, right? Everyone else goes to Washington and they become a swamp creature. And he went to Washington and he was there for a long time. And he came out as the same person that he started. And that's so incredibly rare, even if someone goes to Washington with, great morals and great values and they want to change things, and they usually end up like Elizabeth Warren,
Yeah.
where they look like a total shill for the pharmaceutical company, right? Or Bernie Sanders, who, same thing, probably had high values and morals and then, gets swallowed by the swamp. And Ron Paul was one of the very few who never got swallowed by the swamp. You think about the courage and the character that takes, and you should immediately have an immense amount of respect for someone who's done that.
It's yeah. I mean, given the trajectory of every other politician thus far, and this is why I'm always very cautious of, I'm very bullish on the Trump administration and a lot of the changes that they're making, but it scares me at the same time, is because I see people getting way too excited about a lot of different individuals. And it's like, hey, don't worship them, continue to hold them accountable.
Yes.
Holding them accountable is the only way we're going to continue down this path of much needed change. I mean, heck, as Bitcoiners, we talk about the fourth turning all the time, right? And
we might be there.
Just curious from your perspective, there's there's the four cycles. There's the the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and then the crisis, right? Or as more popularized, I hear Tim Pool say this all the time. Strong times create, or good men create.
Strong men create good times.
Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create bad times. Bad times create weak men.
Yes. Yeah.
So where do you think we are currently in this cycle? And how, they commonly say that history rhymes, it doesn't repeat. And so how is Bitcoin either accelerating or adjusting the timeline?
Yeah, well, I think, the fourth turning, I think the other interesting book to read along with that is The Sovereign Individual. I actually kind of think they kind of like play off each other really well, have a lot of similarities. And, The Sovereign Individual was written in 96, I think, and it essentially predicted what Bitcoin would be or what it is. So I think that's important to read with it. We didn't really have a crisis. I guess you could call Corona a crisis, but I thought there would be something bigger, right? The last crisis previous was World War II, which was much bigger and worse than coronavirus. But who knows? Maybe we get off with just a little crisis this time. The one that I see that, they correctly predict, and I believe Sovereign Individual does also, but it's just lack of faith in institutions. That's the big one that I always point to. Like, it couldn't be lower, the lack of faith in institutions, whether it's the news media or the government. And, essentially what the current administration is trying to do is restore faith in institutions. They talk about, hey, we need to, Elon's putting all the information on the blockchain so anyone could see it, right? And so it's like they want to restore the faith in institutions by kind of becoming transparent and letting everyone see everything. And that's really the only way to do it, is, hey, we need to be able to see what the truth is. And for so long in the last cycle, say 1950 or, right around there, is that, that's the great euphoric time period after World War II, and everything's great. And, my mom was born in 57, and unfortunately her faith in institutions is still incredibly too high, right? I get frustrated, like, Mom, these damn people on the news media, they've lied to you so many times. And she's like, I can't trust Twitter. My mom doesn't sound that old now. Sorry, Mom. But, we did have, like, I was getting frustrated with her one time. I said, Mom, who's actually lied to you here? I said, let's go. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Well, that was the mainstream media pushing that narrative. Gulf of Tonkin incident, same thing. Like, you can kind of go through the narrative of, the mainstream pushing these not small lies, huge, gigantic lies that get us into wars. And so it's like, yeah, you should have a lack of faith in them. You shouldn't really believe them all that much. So, that's kind of one that really, I believe is a catalyst, is when we can regain faith in institutions. And it's going to be through transparency that everyone can see. That's kind of when the next really positive time period starts, I think.
Do you think the right mechanisms are in place to restore that level of trust? I know I've heard you talk about, and Bitcoiners as a whole always talk about this too, high time preference versus low time preference.
Yes.
And considering the fact that the government is not only, it's kind of ironic that Bitcoin has 4-year cycles, and so does the executive branch of government, right?
Yeah.
We have elections every 4 years. And as a byproduct of that, everyone's hyper fixated on, the next election. And so the government as a default has a very high time preference. Do you think even with the current administration and Elon Musk's Doge, do you think that's enough to mitigate that institutional proclivity towards high time preference?
Yeah, well, possibly. So, all this USAID stuff they're uncovering, essentially, we knew that the politicians were pandering to special interest as opposed to the voters. And so, but now it's almost even worse than we thought, right? That there's all these other channels through which they were getting money and getting paid and pandering to them that were kind of even behind the scenes versus just like big pharma or, the big banks or that type of stuff. So, if they can unwind those things well enough that it becomes obvious who's taking what. And then I don't know how you hold the politicians accountable. I don't know what the transparency is there. Between saying like you're not allowed to take money from big pharma or big banks or lobbyists or whatever, it's like, I don't know, just pay them enough money. I would be in favor of like, hey, let's just pay them enough money where they don't feel the need to go get money from other people, like get rich. And then the idea that a lot of these people, whether it's the FDA or the CDC, they go serve on those committees, and then all of a sudden they go to the pharmaceutical company, right? Or they work at the Federal Reserve, and then all of a sudden they go work at Goldman Sachs. So I don't know, right? I don't know what the exact mechanism is. I can tell you that's the problem. It's not my problem to fix. So I haven't spent too much time thinking about it, but those are all problems, and they need to be able to fix those. And if they can fix those, then we, the American people, will start to regain trust because we know that they have our best interests in mind, right? So when you don't trust someone, it's because you know that they don't really have your best interest in mind. And that's kind of how we all feel right now, is we know that the people in Washington who are supposed to serve us aren't really serving our best interest. They have bigger masters. And so that's the problem we need to solve. I don't know exactly how we're going to solve it. I haven't spent too much time thinking about it. But hopefully we get there.
I think the obvious answer is super high level. You can laugh at me. It's obviously Bitcoin. Yeah. But I guess the question behind the question that I was trying to allude to, and I haven't seen a whole lot of people talk about this, is that we don't have multiple administrations to push forward an SBR. We have one chance at this, I think.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like I kind of disagree with that. I mean, and this would be a fourth turning thing too. Is one of the things was or is it sovereign individual? I think it's fourth turning, but it's like a new political party affiliation. So like with this Unity Party, it's mostly a bunch of old Democrats who are like Democrats suck, right? Like how many people that are in the Unity Party like were Democrats for a long period of time, and the answer is most of them. So it is almost like a new political affiliation or a new political party. And to me, when you look at who do they're the Republicans now, but yeah, they're not really Republicans. Who do they have in the chamber versus who do the like current Democrats have? Like, what do they got? Gavin Newsom, like he sucks, but like he can be semi-charismatic. Who else do they have that's good versus like, dude, Vivek, he's awesome. JD, he's awesome. Tulsi, she's awesome. RFK, he's awesome. Like, any of these people are hugely compelling next candidates after Trump.
Yeah, I saw a tweet the other day from Matthew. Sorry, go ahead.
So I probably forgot a few also. Like I listed a few, but there's more than that are great.
Oh, there's plenty. I mean, the whole old school Republican, Democrat lines are just totally blown up with COVID and just the eye of the public being hyper aware, or at least more aware to everything going on. I mean, Twitter's obviously been a huge catalyst. And, I wanted to make this comment earlier that, your mother was mentioning that she didn't get Twitter all that much, but still had some faith in institutions, because my parents are still that way as well.
Yes.
And the irony in that is that X in and of itself, or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, is almost an institution in and of itself, just for, Gen Xers, millennials, Gen Z, and that sort of thing. But it's a Do
you really think that? Or, I mean, like, obviously we saw with the last administration how corrupt it was when they told, Facebook to say, take down the Hunter Biden laptop, for example. Another mainstream media lie. But with Elon, it feels as though when he bought it, he said, hey, here's freedom. And it's not controlled by the government. Maybe I'm delusional in that, but that is how I feel. And so then in that instance, and this is right, the what it's called, oh my gosh, the public square law, I think it's section 230 or whatever, where if they monitor speech, then they're liable. But if they let people speak freely, then they're not liable. It's essentially a town square. And that was kind of what they've used to get over the monopoly stuff. And so if they, if it is a town square where anyone can speak freely, then what Elon keeps saying is you are the media. Individuals are the media. And people can be judged based on their content. And that's what I always say about it was, Twitter, now X is, if you curate your own feed enough, right? If you start following people and you say, okay, I follow Alan, man, Alan was full of shit on those three things. I'm not following that dude no more. He's full of shit, right?
Right.
And versus you say, there's a few people I follow that I'm like, holy crap, they've been right. They've been ahead of it so many times. Like and that's why I said the really smart people, the semi-smart people, they get it right from afterwards, right? Hindsight is 20/20, and they're really good at creating great narratives and explanations to why things happen. But the people who are really brilliant are the ones who are getting it ahead of time. They're saying, this is what is going to happen, right? They're predictive about it. And then what they're predicting comes to be correct. Those are the people who I want to listen to and follow because they're incredibly intelligent. And so I think if you curate your own feed on social media and you are discerning about who's right and who's wrong, and no one's going to be right every single time, but if they lean a certain way and they get it right most of the time, they're probably pretty trustworthy.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the reason why maybe institution is not the right word, because 100% X is like a town hall. But I think the thing that scares me is like Musk didn't create X, right? It was Dorsey who created Twitter. Yeah. And during the Dorsey era, censorship was running en masse. I mean, it was essentially coordinated cahoots amongst Meta, Twitter, and any other large social media platform to, manipulate the minds and the hearts of Americans, unfortunately. And so is X always going to be that way when it inevitably comes under new ownership? It's hard to say. That's why I kind of feel like it falls under the category of an institution. But to circle back to the point of you being able to, pick and choose who are you following, who do you want to listen to, that's a super powerful thing. And in Bitcoin especially, right, there's no like rule book or handbook that you can just read to get Bitcoin. I mean, we've talked about the fourth turning. We've talked about the sovereign individual. There's a million other Bitcoin books that we could probably recommend. But for you as Ben, right, entering down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I guess, what were some of the influential voices in Bitcoin that helped shape your understanding in your journey?
Yeah. Well, the first one I recommend to everyone is the Bitcoin Standard. I think it's a pretty easy read for most people. It explains, what is good money, and then explains why it is Bitcoin. So that's always the first one that I get people started with. And I don't ever tell anyone to really buy Bitcoin, or if I say, hey, you should buy Bitcoin, I said, I want you to understand it also. Because I don't want you to blame it on me if the price goes down for a little bit of time. I want you to understand why you're buying it, right? And have control over your own destiny. So I tell them you should read that. And then once they read that, then, they want to talk about it. And then we start talking about it. Then obviously there's other books. I like Jimmy Song's book, Why Fiat Ruins Everything. That's a good one. You can also go down the rabbit hole of like human rights stuff. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now. What's his
Alex
name?
Gladstein.
Alex Gladstein, thank you. He's got a couple really good books out. So you can start going on that rabbit hole also, which, that led me to Economic Hitman, where I was like, I kind of knew it. Like I kind of didn't trust everything, but it's like that makes you not trust everything even more than you do already. Let's see, who else is great? Those are the ones that come to mind offhand.
I haven't had a chance to read the Confessions of an Economic Hitman book, and that might be blasphemous because I've heard incredible things. But I guess for the audience, we've kind of danced around this topic a little bit about how Bitcoin disincentivizes war.
Yeah.
Explain that for people.
Well, back in the day, you used to have to sell war bonds, right? You had to convince your people to go to war by selling war bonds. And now you could just use the money printer and you can do whatever you want. And so, in the previous time, and obviously if you get far enough back, like far, far, far back, it's like, well, you had to actually have the economic resources. And if you didn't have them, then the war was over, right? And therefore war was way shorter. It wasn't these forever wars that we've been fighting because you only had a certain amount of money to fight for a certain amount of time. And if it wasn't over by then. So, if you're planning for something, you have to have a clear and concise idea of what you want to do and how you want to do it. If you say, I only have $1 million, right, to build I'm going to build a building. I got $1 million. Well, I better know how much the materials cost, how much I'm going to spend, how much time it's going to take, blah, 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 right? I need to have a plan. But when you have a money printer, all of a sudden you don't care because you can just keep it going forever because you can just keep printing and printing and printing. And, that's kind of what happened, right? We were in Iraq for 20-ish years. We were in Afghanistan for 20-ish years. And we had these kind of forever wars going on. And so, hopefully if, you get rid of the money printer and it's hard money and people don't want to vote for it, then it won't happen.
Yeah, I am hopeful. We're in an interesting time right now. Money's bad, and as a default to the points you just made, we're seeing a number of not just trade wars but physical wars. Obviously, the situation in Israel and the situation in Ukraine is not great. But I'm hopeful that with the current administration, that both those wars are going to come to an end. To button up a couple of things we've talked about to come full circle, I'm hopeful we audit Fort Knox and we realize there's the gold that should be in there isn't in there, and that's going to also be an incentive to try and end wars. I'm hopeful that these gold bugs are going to come on board and help advocate more and more for a Bitcoin only strategic reserve. Yes. I don't want to see the U.S. continuing to speed run the shitcoining, especially crazy when you see someone like, not in the U.S. obviously, but Javier Milei, president of Argentina, launch Libra token.
That was wild.
Crazy. Glad he did it.
Someone on Trump's team did Trump token.
That's true.
I don't know. It wasn't Donald Trump, but I don't know who did it, but it was someone, in his circle. And they did Melania. That was utterly ridiculous. And that's like, it's important to also hold people accountable. It's like, why did he do that? What the freak, And, non-Bitcoiners, like they don't know. They're like, oh, he just did some fun coin. But for Bitcoin, it's like, what's he doing? This is bullshit. Why is he doing this? I don't get it.
Well, the crazy thing is that was only like a month and a half ago, I think, that it happened. Yeah. And it feels like decades ago, or at least a couple of months, 3 to 6, which is the irony thing here in Bitcoin, just how fast. I guess it's just a whole for the world. Stories are just so much more readily available through platforms like X. But to bring things full circle, so I know we've got only a little bit of time left. I haven't had too much of a chance to ask you about the Bitcoin conference as a whole and your participation in it. You've spoken at 22, 23, 24. You've been on the desk. You've been on stage. You've had chances to talk with lots of great people. I think the last two events, you've gotten pretty close to RFK just in conversation. For those who haven't been to the Bitcoin conference, I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the highlights of the previous events. And then what are you looking forward to for Bitcoin 2025?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, I love hearing people talk about Bitcoin, and even just in passing, it's really fun for me to be around so many people who are intellectually stimulated by this, right? And who have similar things. And one of the things I tell my wife about living in Wisconsin is there just aren't enough people who are intellectually curious about stuff. Not to shit on Wisconsinites, but a lot of them want to just do their job, drink their beer, go to Friday Fish Fry, and watch the Packers. And I'm just not all that into that. And that kind of creates a dilemma for me, is I don't have too many intellectually stimulating conversations. And when I go to something like a Bitcoin conference, I have so many, right? It's awesome because you're around a bunch of like-minded people. Awesome speakers, right? So I got to list a whole bunch of different great speakers. RFK, he gave an amazing speech last year. I was at a private party that he was at in 2023. Same thing, and you understand he can clearly articulate how well and how deep he understands Bitcoin. So yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the speaker lineup yet. I'm sure it's going to be great. This will be my first one in a real bull market. We were in 2022. It was kind of on the way down. 2023 was it was depressing because it was crazy how much smaller it was in 2022. 2024 was a lot of fun. Met a lot of really cool people there. And so yeah, I'm excited for 2025. Hopefully meet some really cool people and see some cool things. And who knows? Maybe we'll have some great announcements there also.
Any tangible predictions for 2025? I gotta ask. It's the cringe question.
I think a Bitcoin reserve will happen. I don't know if it'll be a Bitcoin exclusive, but a Bitcoin reserve will happen in 2025. I would venture to guess then that would force some other nation states, down that path. Corporate adoption is, if you look, say 3 years ago, it was one company and that's it. Now it feels like, they might not be huge companies, but it feels like all the time there's, the X company's buying 20 Bitcoin, this company's buying 50 Bitcoin, and, stuff like that, which is, it may not seem that big, but if you get enough of those type of companies, it's absolutely impactful. And who knows, maybe you get something like a GameStop start buying, which could be hugely impactful. Yeah, so I think both corporate adoption and nation state adoption will happen in 2025. Yeah, I don't know if there'd be anything else exciting. I would predict those two, and I don't know what else.
I gotta ask the cringe question. Where do you think price is going to be?
Man, I always hate that question. It's funny. So I don't do a Bitcoin podcast anymore. We did the Funky Crypto podcast, me and John Kim, for, I want to say it was roughly 2 years. And one of our ending, we did rapid fire at the end. And one of the questions was, price at the end of the cycle. And last cycle it was only 70. And I think there was only one or two people who predicted anything less than 100,000. Now that cycle may have been stunted by that jackass at FTX selling customers Bitcoin to buy his own token to prop up the price. But it didn't, it just didn't get there. So I hate making price prediction. And, the other thing is I was going to sell a little bit at the top last cycle and only to buy more. I don't have anything else I really want to do with my money, except I wanted to buy more because I thought the cycle was going to happen. And instead of listening to timing, I was listening to price, and that caused me to get it wrong. So I don't want to make a price prediction. Hopefully it's high. I do think it is going to be a cycle is going to be, September, October will be the cycle top of this time. I think we'll have at least one more cycle. I mean, yes, at some point, I think the cyclical nature will end and it will just kind of go up forever with, small dips and troughs here and there. So I don't want to make a price prediction. Hopefully it's high. I do think it will be September, October this year. And I think this will be probably our last cycle.
Yeah. One BTC equals one BTC, right? I respect that. Yes. Well, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. For those who want to follow you, where can people find you at?
You know what? I have not been super active on social media, but I'm at Ben Askren on Twitter, and Instagram. And, yeah, I've just kind of living my nice quiet life lately.
I respect that. Ben, thanks
Yeah.
again. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it, man.
Cheers.
Have a great day.